Richard Chen stood in the middle of Central Park, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. His phone was still in his hand, the screen showing his last business call had ended 3 minutes ago. But his son was gone. "Tommy," he shouted, spinning around in a complete circle. "Tommy, where are you?" The playground area was packed with families enjoying the Saturday afternoon. Kids were everywhere, running, laughing, climbing on the jungle gym. But none of them was his 6-year-old son. Richard felt his chest tighten. How could this happen? How could he lose his own child? Just 10 minutes ago, everything was fine. Tommy had been playing on the swings, his small legs pumping back and forth, his laugh cutting through the noise of the park. Richard had been watching him, really watching him for the first time in weeks. Then his phone rang. It was David from the office calling about the Henderson deal. A merger worth $300 million, the biggest deal of Richard's career. "I'll just be 1 minute," Richard had told himself, turning slightly away from the playground. Tommy's right there. He's safe. 1 minute turned into 5, then 8. The conversation got heated. Henderson was backing out, wanted new terms, threatened to walk away completely. Richard's entire focus shifted to saving the deal. When he finally hung up and turned back around, the swing was empty. That was 7 minutes ago. 7 minutes that felt like 7 hours. "Tommy," Richard called again, louder this time. Other parents were starting to stare at him. He didn't care. His hands were shaking as he pulled up his security team's number. Yes, he had a security team. When you're worth $2 billion, you don't go anywhere without protection. But today, for the first time in months, Richard had wanted to be just a regular dad. He'd told his bodyguards to stay at the park entrance to give him and Tommy some space. What a stupid decision that was. "Sir, what's wrong?" Mike, his head of security, answered on the first ring. "Tommy's missing. He was at the playground near the Bethesda fountain." "Get everyone here now. Search the entire area." Richard's voice cracked. "Find my son." Within 2 minutes, 4 men in dark suits appeared, moving quickly through the crowds. Richard joined them, checking behind every tree, every bench, every food cart. He showed Tommy's photo to everyone he passed. A woman selling ice cream shook her head. A jogger hadn't seen anything. A group of teenagers were too busy on their phones to even look up. Richard's mind was racing with horrible possibilities. Tommy was only 6. He was small for his age, quiet, a bit shy. What if someone took him? What if he wandered toward the road? What if he fell in the lake? Richard had read the statistics once about how quickly a child could disappear in a crowded place. The first few hours were critical. His phone buzzed. It was his assistant, Carol. She'd somehow already heard about the situation and was offering to contact the police. Richard told her to wait just a few more minutes. He didn't want to believe this was real. He didn't want to admit that he'd failed as a father, because that's what this was, wasn't it? Failure, pure and simple. Richard thought about Tommy's mother, Jennifer. She died 2 years ago. Breast cancer, just 40 years old. In her final days, she'd made Richard promise to take care of their son, to be there for him, to not let work consume his entire life. "Promise me you'll really see him." "Richard," Jennifer had whispered, her hand weak in his. "Not just look at him, see him. Know him?" Richard had promised. He'd meant it too. But somehow, month after month, he'd let that promise slip away. There were always meetings, always deals, always one more conference call. Tommy had nannies, tutors, therapists. He had everything money could buy. Everything except his father's full attention. And now, on the one day Richard actually tried to be present, actually tried to spend real time with his son, he'd messed it up. One business call. That's all it took. Anything? Richard asked Mike, who was coordinating the search on his radio. "Not yet, sir. We're expanding the perimeter." Richard's stomach churned. The park was huge, over 800 acres. Tommy could be anywhere. He looked at his watch. 15 minutes now. 15 minutes since he'd last seen his son's face. He tried to remember what Tommy was wearing. Blue jacket, yes, jeans. Red sneakers with lights in them that Tommy loved because they blinked when he walked. A Spider-Man shirt underneath the jacket. His hair was dark, straight, cut short. He had a small scar above his right eyebrow from when he'd fallen off his bike last summer. Richard pulled out his phone and looked at his recent photos. There was one from this morning, Tommy eating breakfast, barely smiling. The boy smiled so rarely these days. Richard had hoped today would change that. A whole day together, just the two of them. No nannies, no schedules, no business. Just father and son. "Please," Richard whispered to no one in particular. "Please let him be okay." More security arrived. They were being discreet, not wanting to cause a panic, but Richard didn't care about discretion anymore. He cared about finding Tommy. He approached a park ranger, explained the situation. The ranger immediately radioed for backup and started organizing a more systematic search. "We'll find him, sir," the ranger said, his voice professional but kind. "Kids wander off in parks all the time. He's probably just exploring, lost track of where you were." Richard wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe Tommy was fine, just confused, maybe looking for him too. But the fear in his chest wouldn't ease. Tommy wasn't the type to wander off. He was careful, maybe too careful for a 6-year-old. He followed rules. He listened to instructions unless something had scared him. Unless someone had lured him away. Richard felt sick. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his mother calling from Florida. She'd heard from Carol. Richard ignored the call. He couldn't talk to her right now. Couldn't hear her worry. Couldn't face her questions about how this happened. 25 minutes now. The afternoon sun was starting to shift, casting longer shadows across the park. In a few hours it would be getting dark. The thought of Tommy out there alone at night made Richard's knees weak. "Sir, we should contact the police now," Mike said, appearing at Richard's side. "It's been almost half an hour." Richard nodded, unable to speak. This was really happening. His son was gone and he was the reason why. One phone call. One moment of divided attention. That's all it took to lose everything that mattered. As Mike made the call, Richard closed his eyes and made a silent promise. If Tommy came back safe, if he got just one more chance, things would be different. Really different. No more putting work first. No more broken promises. He'd be the father Jennifer had asked him to be. The father Tommy deserved if only he got the chance. Maya Rodriguez had exactly $12 in her pocket, and 7 of those dollars were meant for her grandmother's medicine. That left $5 for everything else. She'd already decided to skip dinner tonight. It wouldn't be the first time. She sat on a bench near the pond in Central Park, taking a moment to rest her feet. She'd been on them since 5 that morning, working the early shift at the diner on Amsterdam Avenue. Her second job, stocking shelves at the grocery store, didn't start until 6 tonight. These few hours in between were all she had to herself. The park was beautiful this time of year. Maya loved watching the families, the kids playing, the couples walking hand in hand. It reminded her of simpler times before her grandmother got sick, before she'd had to drop out of city college, before her whole life became about working and surviving. She was 20 years old and felt 40. Maya pulled out the half sandwich she'd wrapped up from the diner. Tony, the cook, always made extra and let her take the leftovers. He knew her situation. A lot of people did. Maya wasn't good at hiding struggle. She'd just taken her first bite when she heard it. A small choked sound, like someone trying not to cry but failing. Maya looked around and spotted a little boy standing by the edge of the pond, maybe 15 feet away. He was alone, his shoulders shaking. He couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. She watched for a moment, expecting a parent to appear, but no one came. The boy wiped his eyes with his sleeve and looked around frantically, spinning in a circle. That's when Maya knew something was wrong. She'd seen that look before, when she'd volunteered at the children's center back in college. Pure panic. She stood up and walked over slowly, not wanting to scare him. "Hey there," she said softly. "Are you okay?" The boy looked up at her with big, frightened eyes. Tears were streaming down his face. "I can't find my daddy," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know where he went." Maya's heart clenched. She knelt down to his level. "Okay, it's okay. We'll find him. What's your name?" "Tommy," the boy whispered. "Hi, Tommy, I'm Maya. When did you last see your daddy?" Tommy's face crumpled. "I don't know. I was playing by the fountain and there was a bird, a really pretty bird with blue feathers, and I followed it. And then I looked back and Daddy was gone." Maya glanced around. The park was huge and crowded. Tommy's father could be anywhere, probably panicking right now too. She pulled out her phone, then remembered it was dead. She'd forgotten to charge it last night after her late shift. "It's going to be okay," Maya said, even though she wasn't sure how. "Your daddy's probably looking for you right now." "Did he tell you what to do if you got lost?" Tommy shook his head. "I'm not supposed to get lost." "Well, nobody plans to get lost, sweetie. It just happens sometimes." Maya thought for a moment. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to stay right here where it's safe, and we'll look for your daddy together. Sound good?" Tommy nodded, but his lip was still trembling. Maya noticed he was shivering too. The October afternoon was getting cooler and his jacket looked too thin. "Are you cold?" she asked. "A little." Maya didn't hesitate. She took off her cardigan and wrapped it around his shoulders. It was her only warm layer and she'd need it tonight when her shift started, but Tommy needed it more. "There. Better?" Tommy nodded again, pulling the cardigan tighter. "Thank you," he said quietly. They sat down on the bench together, and Maya kept scanning the area for anyone who looked like they might be searching for a child. She saw joggers, couples, groups of teenagers, but no frantic father. "Are you hungry?" Maya asked, noticing Tommy eyeing her sandwich. "I'm not supposed to take food from strangers." "That's a very smart rule," Maya said, "but I think in situations like this it's okay. And we're not really strangers anymore, right? We're friends now." Tommy considered this. "I guess so." Maya split her sandwich in half and handed him the bigger piece. Tommy took it carefully and started eating. She could tell he was hungry, really hungry. When had this kid last eaten? "So Tommy, tell me about your daddy." "What does he do?" "He works a lot," Tommy said between bites. "He's always on the phone. He talks about numbers and meetings and deals. Sounds like a busy guy." "Yeah." Tommy's voice got quieter. "He's busy all the time. We don't really do stuff together much. Today was supposed to be special." He said no work, just me and him. Maya felt a pang in her chest. She'd heard that tone before. In kids whose parents made promises they couldn't keep. "I'm sure he meant it, sweetie." He was on the phone, though. "When I left, he was talking loud about someone named Henderson. So the father had gotten distracted by a call." Maya understood. "When you were struggling, when money was tight, when work was everything, sometimes you forgot what really mattered. But that didn't make it hurt less for the kid." "Well, I bet he's really worried about you right now," Maya said. "And I bet when he finds you, he's going to give you the biggest hug ever." "Maybe," Tommy said, not sounding convinced. They sat in silence for a while, watching the ducks on the pond. Maya kept looking around, hoping to spot someone searching, maybe a security guard or a police officer. But the park just continued its lazy afternoon rhythm. "My mom died," Tommy said suddenly. Maya's breath caught. "Oh, Tommy, I'm so sorry. It was 2 years ago. I was 4. I don't remember her that much anymore, and that makes me sad. I bet she was wonderful. Daddy says I have her smile, but I don't smile much anymore." Maya felt tears prick her own eyes. This poor kid, lost his mother, barely saw his father, and now he was literally lost in a park. How much could one little person take? "You know what?" Maya said, an idea forming. "How about I tell you a story? Would you like that?" Tommy nodded, moving closer to her on the bench. So Maya told him a story. Not a fancy one from a book, but one she made up on the spot, about a brave little boy who got lost in a magical forest and made friends with all the animals. She did voices for the different characters, made Tommy laugh when she acted out a silly squirrel. For a little while, he forgot to be scared. When the story ended, Tommy looked up at her. "You're nice," he said simply. "You're pretty nice yourself, kiddo. Most people don't talk to me like you do. Most people are different around me." "What do you mean?" Tommy shrugged. "I don't know. They act weird, like they're nervous or something." Maya wondered about that, but didn't push. Maybe Tommy's dad was someone important, someone intimidating. Or maybe it was just the way rich people moved through the world differently. She'd noticed that working in the diner. The wealthy customers always seemed surrounded by invisible walls. An hour passed. Maya knew she should find a park ranger or a police officer. But Tommy had grown comfortable with her, and she didn't want to scare him again by dragging him around the park. Plus, if his father was looking for him, wouldn't he come back to the fountain area eventually? "Tell me about you," Tommy said. "Do you have kids?" Maya laughed. "No, I'm only 20. Too young for kids, and do you have a job?" "I have 3, actually." Tommy's eyes widened. 3? That's a lot. "Yeah, well, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. I work at a diner in the morning, a grocery store at night, and I walk dogs on Sundays." "Why so many jobs?" "My grandmother's sick. She needs medicine and doctors, and that stuff costs money. A lot of money. My daddy has a lot of money," Tommy said matter-of-factly. "We have a really big house." "Like really big? I think there are rooms I've never even been in." "Wow, that is big. But it's not fun. It's just empty. And quiet. I like it better here with you." Those words broke something inside Maya. Here was this kid who probably had every toy, Every game, every material thing he could want. And he'd rather sit on a park bench with a broke stranger. You're a special kid. Tommy, don't forget that. As the afternoon wore on, Maya taught Tommy how to skip stones on the pond. She showed him how to identify different types of birds. They played I Spy in 20 questions. She showed him the constellations she remembered from a childhood book, even though it was still daylight. She promised to show him the real thing someday if they ever found his dad. Tommy had stopped crying completely now. He was smiling, even laughing. And Maya realized that this unexpected afternoon, this strange situation, was somehow one of the best days she'd had in months, not because of where she was or what she was doing, but because for a few hours she was making a real difference in someone's life. She was mattering. Richard was running now, his expensive shoes pounding against the park pathway. 3 hours. Tommy had been missing for 3 hours. The police were here. Park rangers were searching. His security team had covered every inch of the nearby areas. And nothing. His phone had been ringing nonstop. His mother, his brother, Carol, the board members who'd somehow gotten wind of the situation. He'd ignored them all. Nothing mattered except finding his son. "Sir, we need to check the boathouse area again," Mike said through his radio. "We've got a report of a child matching Tommy's description near the pond." Richard's heart leaped into his throat. He changed direction, sprinting toward the boathouse. "Please let it be him. Please let him be safe." As he got closer, he heard it. Laughter. A child's laughter. Tommy's laughter. Richard rounded the corner and stopped dead in his tracks. There, sitting on a bench by the pond, was his son. Tommy was smiling, really smiling, in a way Richard hadn't seen in months. He was wearing a cardigan that was way too big for him, and sitting next to him was a young woman. She looked to be in her early 20s with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her clothes were worn, faded jeans and a t-shirt with a small hole near the hem, and she was holding Tommy's hand. Something hot and angry flared in Richard's chest. Who was this woman? What was she doing with his son? Why was Tommy smiling with a complete stranger when he barely smiled at home? "Tommy!" Richard shouted, running forward. Tommy's head snapped up. "Daddy!" But Richard barely heard the excitement in his son's voice. He was too focused on the woman, who had stood up quickly, looking startled. His security team swarmed in behind him, surrounding the bench. "Step away from my son," Richard said, his voice hard and cold. The woman's eyes went wide. "Wait, I can explain." "I said step away." Richard reached for Tommy, pulling him off the bench and behind him. Tommy made a confused sound, reaching back toward the woman. "Sir, we need to ask you some questions," Mike said to the woman, his hand moving toward her arm. "No," Tommy shouted. "Don't be mean to Maya. She helped me." "It's okay, Tommy," the woman said, her voice shaky but trying to stay calm. "I understand your daddy's upset." "Upset?" Richard spun to face her. "My son has been missing for 3 hours." 3 hours? "Do you have any idea what I've been going through? The police are searching the entire park. I thought he was dead or kidnapped or—" His voice broke. He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm so sorry," the woman said, and she actually looked it. "I found Tommy by the pond. He was crying, said he couldn't find you. I stayed with him because he was scared. I was going to look for a park ranger, but Tommy didn't want to move and I didn't want to leave him alone." "So you just kept him?" Richard interrupted. "For 3 hours? It didn't occur to you that someone might be looking for him?" "My phone's dead," she said, pulling it out to show him. "And honestly, I thought you'd come back to the fountain area. That's where Tommy said he'd last seen you." Richard felt Mike's hand on his shoulder, a silent warning to calm down, but he couldn't. The fear and panic of the last 3 hours was turning into anger, and this woman was the easiest target. "Do you make a habit of picking up lost children?" Richard asked coldly. "Daddy, stop!" Tommy pushed past Richard and ran to the woman, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Maya's my friend. She gave me her sweater and her food and told me stories. She was nice to me." The woman, Maya, gently placed her hands on Tommy's shoulders. "It's okay, sweetie. Your daddy was really worried about you. He's not mad at you." "He sounds mad at you," Tommy said, his voice small. Richard felt something crack in his chest. His son was defending a stranger, a woman he'd met 3 hours ago, while Richard, his own father, was being cast as the villain. "Sir, we should check the security footage," one of the park rangers said, approaching carefully. "There are cameras around this area." "Do it," Richard said immediately. They walked to the ranger station, the whole group of them. Maya stayed close to Tommy, who refused to let go of her hand. Richard walked ahead, his jaw clenched, trying to process everything. The ranger pulled up the footage on his computer. Richard watched the screen, his security team crowding around. There it was, clear as day, Tommy walking alone, crying, Maya approaching him carefully. The two of them sitting on the bench. Maya taking off her cardigan and putting it on Tommy, sharing food with him, making him laugh. Hours of footage showing nothing but a young woman keeping his son safe and happy. Richard felt the anger drain out of him, replaced by something worse. Shame. Sir, Mike said quietly. She's telling the truth. She was protecting him. Richard nodded slowly, unable to speak. He'd been so ready to blame her, to paint her as the threat when all along she'd been the answer to his prayers. She'd found his son when Richard couldn't. She'd kept him safe when Richard had failed. They walked back outside. Maya was sitting on a bench with Tommy, talking quietly. When she saw them approaching, she stood up, her hands nervously fidgeting with her phone. The footage confirms your story, Richard said stiffly. I apologize for the accusations. Maya nodded but didn't say anything. She looked exhausted. Maya, you don't have to go, Tommy said, his eyes filling with tears again. Tell her she doesn't have to go, Daddy. Tommy, Maya probably has places to be, Richard started. Actually, I do, Maya said, checking her watch. I have to get to work in an hour. She knelt down in front of Tommy. But I'm so glad I got to spend the afternoon with you. You're a really great kid, you know that? Will I see you again? Tommy asked, his voice breaking. Maya glanced at Richard, then back at Tommy. I don't know, sweetie. But I'll remember today forever. Promise. Tommy threw his arms around her neck, hugging her tight. Maya hugged him back, and Richard saw her blink rapidly, fighting tears. When they separated, Maya handed Tommy back his cardigan. You should give this back to me. But you'll be cold, Tommy protested. I'll be okay. I promise. Richard watched this exchange, something shifting in his perspective. Maya's clothes were worn. Her shoes had seen better days. She'd mentioned having to get to work, and something about the way she said it made him think she wasn't heading to an office job. Wait, Richard said, as Maya started to walk away. I'd like to thank you properly. Please, let me give you a reward for keeping Tommy safe. Maya turned back, and there was something fierce in her eyes. I don't want a reward. I did what anyone should do. But most people wouldn't, Richard said. Most people would have helped a scared kid. I hope that's not true. They stared at each other for a long moment. Richard saw pride in her expression and something else. Dignity, maybe. Despite her worn clothes and obvious financial struggles, she carried herself with a quiet strength. At least let me drive you to work, Richard offered. It's the least I can do. Maya looked at Tommy, who was watching hopefully. She sighed. Okay, but just to work. No fancy restaurants or anything. Deal. They walked to where Richard's car was parked, a sleek black Mercedes that probably cost more than Maya made in 5 years. Richard saw her eyes widen slightly when she saw it, but she didn't comment. The drive was quiet at first. Tommy sat in the back with Maya still holding her hand. Richard watched them in the rearview mirror, something painful squeezing his heart. His son looked happier than he had in months, and it was because of a stranger who'd shown him more genuine care in 3 hours than Richard had managed in weeks. Where are we headed? Richard asked, breaking the silence. The grocery store on Broadway and 110th, Maya said. I stock shelves there. Richard nodded, processing this. And you said you have other jobs too? A diner in the morning and dog walking on Sundays. That's a lot of work. My grandmother needs medication. It's expensive. Maya said it matter-of-factly without self-pity. Tommy piped up from the back. Maya's grandmother is sick, Daddy. That's why she works so hard. She's really nice for doing that. Yes, Richard said slowly. Yes, she is. When they pulled up to the grocery store, Maya unbuckled quickly. Thank you for the ride. And Tommy? Be good for your dad, okay? Okay, Tommy said, but his eyes were full of tears again. Maya got out of the car and headed toward the store entrance. Richard sat there for a moment, his hands on the steering wheel, his mind racing. Daddy, Tommy said from the back seat, I really like Maya. I can see that, buddy. She's different from other grown-ups. She actually listens. Those words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. His 6-year-old son was telling him in the gentlest way possible that he felt unheard, unseen. Richard thought about Jennifer, about the promise he'd made, about how he'd almost lost his son today because he couldn't stay off his phone for 10 minutes. He thought about Maya, who had nothing but gave everything, who worked 3 jobs to care for her grandmother, who'd sat on a park bench for 3 hours with a scared child, sharing her lunch and her warmth. And he thought about himself, sitting in his mansion with all his money and success, and how empty it all felt. "Mike," Richard said into his radio, "I need you to find out everything you can about Maya Rodriguez. Not to investigate her, to help her. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir. Already on it." Richard looked at his son in the rearview mirror. Tommy was staring out the window at the grocery store entrance where Maya had disappeared. "Daddy?" Tommy said softly. "Do you think Maya will be okay?" Richard didn't know, but he was going to make sure. 3 days had passed since the park incident, and Richard couldn't stop thinking about it. More specifically, he couldn't stop thinking about Maya Rodriguez. Tommy talked about her constantly. At breakfast, he'd mention the story she'd told him. At dinner, he'd recall how she'd taught him to skip stones. At bedtime, he'd ask when he could see her again. It was the most Richard had heard his son talk in months. But it wasn't just Tommy's reaction that haunted Richard. It was his own behavior. The way he'd immediately assumed the worst. The way he'd treated Maya with suspicion and coldness when she'd done nothing but help his child. The way his first instinct had been to see her as a threat instead of a blessing. He'd been raised to be suspicious of people who weren't in his social circle. His father had drilled it into him from childhood. Everyone wants something from you. Trust no one who isn't worth at least 10 million. Keep your circle small and wealthy. But Maya had wanted nothing. She'd refused his reward. She'd walked away asking for nothing except to be allowed to go to work. Mike's report had arrived that morning, and Richard had read it 3 times. Each time it made him feel worse about himself. Maya Elena Rodriguez, 20 years old. Former honor student at City College, studying to be an elementary school teacher, dropped out after her first year when her grandmother was diagnosed with advanced diabetes and heart disease. Currently working 3 jobs to pay for her grandmother's medications and treatments. Living in a small 1-bedroom apartment in Queens with her grandmother. No savings. Often behind on rent. Still found time to volunteer at a homeless shelter on Sunday mornings before her dog walking shift. The medical bills were staggering. Maya's grandmother needed a surgery that insurance barely covered, and the copay alone was $40,000. Money that Maya would probably never be able to save no matter how many jobs she worked. Richard could write a check for $40,000 right now and not notice the money missing from his account. He could write a check for 10 times that amount, but would Maya accept it? She'd refused a reward for saving his son. Would she accept what she'd see as charity? "Daddy, you're not listening again," Tommy said, pulling Richard out of his thoughts. They were sitting at the breakfast table, just the 2 of them. Richard had cleared his entire schedule for the week. No meetings, no calls, no business. Just him and Tommy. It was the least he could do after nearly losing his son. "Sorry, buddy. What were you saying?" "I asked if we could go back to the park today. Maybe we'll see Maya." Richard's heart squeezed. "Tommy, Maya works during the day. She probably won't be at the park, but maybe on her break? She said she likes to sit there between her jobs." Of course she did, because even when you're exhausted from working since 5 in the morning, you still need somewhere peaceful to exist for an hour. The park was probably the closest thing Maya had to a vacation. "I'll tell you what," Richard said, making a decision. "How about we go see Maya at work instead? We could say hello, make sure she's doing okay." Tommy's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? Can we?" "Sure, but first I need to make a few phone calls." Richard spent the next hour on the phone with his lawyer, his accountant, and the head of his charitable foundation. By the time he was done, he had a plan. Not a perfect plan, but a start. The diner where Maya worked her morning shift was a small, worn place in a neighborhood Richard never had reason to visit. The bell above the door chimed as he and Tommy walked in. Several customers looked up, probably wondering what a man in a $3,000 suit was doing in their neighborhood breakfast spot. Maya was behind the counter, pouring coffee for an elderly man. She was wearing a faded uniform and her hair was pulled back in a tight bun. She looked tired, deep down tired, the kind that sleep doesn't fix. Then she saw them, and her expression shifted through several emotions at once: surprise, confusion, and something that looked like worry. "Tommy," she said, coming around the counter. "What are you doing here?" Tommy ran to her and she caught him in a hug. Richard noticed her wince slightly, like her back or her feet were hurting. "We came to see you," Tommy announced. "Daddy said we could." Maya looked at Richard, her expression guarded. "Mr. Chen, this is unexpected." "I wanted to apologize," Richard said. "Properly, for how I treated you in the park. You did an incredible thing for my son, and I responded with accusations and suspicion." Maya's shoulders relaxed slightly. "It's okay. You were scared. I get it." "It's not okay," Richard said firmly. "You deserve better than that. Tommy deserves better than that." "Hey, Maya, orders are backing up," a voice called from the kitchen. "I'm on it, Tony," Maya called back. She looked at Richard apologetically. "I'm sorry, I'm working. I can't really talk right now. I understand. But before we go, I need to ask you something. Can you take a break?" "Just 5 minutes?" Maya hesitated, then nodded. She spoke to her manager, who looked annoyed but agreed. They stepped outside, Tommy between them, holding both their hands. "I looked into your situation," Richard said, then quickly added, "I know that sounds invasive, and I apologize for that too, but I needed to understand who you are, what you're dealing with." Maya's expression hardened. "Why?" "Because I want to help. I told you I don't want charity. It's not charity. It's gratitude. And honestly, it's penance." "Let me help you, Maya. Let me help your grandmother." "What are you talking about?" Richard took a breath. "Your grandmother needs surgery. $40,000 for the copay. Let me pay for it." Maya stepped back like he'd slapped her. "What? No, absolutely not. Why not?" "Because I don't take money from strangers. I'm not a stranger. I'm Tommy's father. You saved my son. You kept him safe when I couldn't. That's not nothing, Maya. I did what anyone would do." "But you're not just anyone," Richard said, and he realized he meant it. Most people would have called security immediately. Most people wouldn't have shared their lunch or given up their sweater or spent 3 hours entertaining a scared kid. "You did that because that's who you are." Maya's eyes were shining with tears now. "You don't understand. If I take money from you, if I accept your help, what does that make me? Someone who does good things for reward? Someone who only helped your son because I thought I'd get something out of it?" "It makes you human," Richard said gently. "It makes you someone who's been struggling alone for too long and finally has a chance to catch a breath." "Maya's grandma is really sick," Tommy added, his small voice cutting through the tension. "Right, Maya? You said she needs a doctor." Maya looked down at Tommy and a tear escaped down her cheek. "Yes, sweetie, she does. Then you should let Daddy help. He's really good at helping. He just forgets sometimes." Out of the mouths of babes, Richard thought. Maya wiped her eyes. "I can't, I'm sorry. I appreciate the offer, really. But I can't." She went back inside before Richard could respond, the diner door swinging shut behind her. Tommy looked up at his father. "Why won't she let us help?" "Because she's proud, buddy. And scared. Sometimes accepting help feels like admitting you failed. But she didn't fail. She's the strongest person I've ever met." Richard looked at his 6-year-old son and felt a surge of pride. Somehow, despite Richard's failings as a father, Tommy had grown a heart that saw people for who they really were. "You're right," Richard said. "She is strong. But even strong people need help sometimes. Come on, let's go home. I need to think." Over the next few days, Richard tried different approaches. He showed up at the grocery store where Maya worked nights, but she politely avoided talking to him. He wrote her a letter explaining his offer, but it was returned unopened. He called the diner and asked to speak with her, but she refused to take his calls. Meanwhile, Tommy was miserable. He drew pictures of Maya and taped them to his wall. He asked about her constantly. He barely ate at dinner, saying he wished Maya could share her sandwich with him again. Richard felt helpless in a way he'd never experienced in business. In his world, every problem had a solution. Every no could become a yes with the right approach, the right offer, the right pressure. But Maya wasn't a business deal. She was a person with principles, and she'd made her position clear. Then, a week after their first conversation at the diner, Richard got a call from his investigator. Not Mike this time, but a private firm he'd hired to keep tabs on Maya's grandmother's medical situation. He'd told them he just wanted to be alerted if there was an emergency. This was an emergency. "Mr. Chen, I'm calling about Mrs. Rodriguez. She was admitted to the hospital an hour ago. Heart complications. She's in the ICU." Richard felt his stomach drop. "Is she stable?" "For now. but the doctors are saying she needs that surgery immediately. Without it, she might not make it through the month. Richard hung up and sat in silence for a long moment. Then he picked up the phone and started making calls. 2 hours later, he was at Metropolitan Hospital, riding the elevator up to the ICU floor. He'd spoken with the billing department, the head of cardiology, and the hospital administrator. Everything was arranged. He found Maya in the waiting room, curled up in a plastic chair, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up when she heard footsteps, and when she saw Richard, her expression went from surprise to understanding to anger in a matter of seconds. "What did you do?" she asked, standing up. "I paid for the surgery, and all the associated costs. Your grandmother." The surgery took 6 hours. Richard and Tommy sat with Maya the entire time, through every anxious minute. Richard had offered to wait in a private room, somewhere more comfortable, but Maya had refused. So they sat in the crowded waiting room with everyone else, drinking terrible vending machine coffee and watching the clock. Tommy fell asleep with his head on Maya's lap around hour 4. She stroked his hair absently, her eyes never leaving the surgery board where her grandmother's status was displayed. "You're good with him," Richard said quietly, not wanting to wake his son. "He's a good kid. You're lucky." "I know. I just forget sometimes. Too busy trying to build an empire to notice I already have everything that matters." Maya glanced at him. "Is that why you're really doing this? Out of guilt?" "Maybe partly," Richard admitted. "But mostly, I'm doing it because it's right. And because I can. For the first time in my life, I'm in a position where I can actually change someone's life with a single decision. That's powerful. And it's humbling. You say that like you've never helped anyone before." "I've written checks to charities, attended fundraisers, put my name on buildings, but I've never looked someone in the eye and seen their struggle and decided to do something about it personally. There's a difference." "Well, what changed?" Richard looked down at his sleeping son. "Tommy, the way he talked about you. The way he lit up when he remembered your stories. I realized my son had spent 3 hours with you and felt more cared for than he'd felt in months of being with me. That's a mirror I needed to look into. You're being too hard on yourself. You were scared when he went missing. Fear makes people react badly." "No, Maya. I was a bad father before that day. I just didn't want to admit it. I put everything into work because it was easier than dealing with grief. Easier than figuring out how to raise a son alone. Easier than living up to the promise I made to my wife." Maya was quiet for a moment. "What was she like?" "Your wife? Beautiful. Inside and out. She was a teacher, actually. 2nd grade. She loved kids, loved teaching, loved making a difference. She would have liked you." "I was studying to be a teacher," Maya said softly, "before everything happened. I know. Mike's report mentioned it. That was my dream. To be like the teachers who made a difference in my life. To be the person who saw kids when nobody else did. What's stopping you from going back?" Maya laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Money, time, reality, take your pick." Richard didn't respond immediately. He was thinking, forming an idea that felt both crazy and completely right. Finally, the surgeon appeared, still in his scrubs. Maya stood up so fast she nearly knocked Tommy off the chair. Richard caught his son, who stirred but didn't wake. "Ms. Rodriguez," the surgeon said. "Your grandmother did great. The surgery was a complete success. She'll need time to recover and we'll want to monitor her closely for a few weeks, but her prognosis is excellent." Maya's knees buckled. Richard caught her with his free arm, holding both her and Tommy. She sobbed into his shoulder, years of fear and stress and exhaustion pouring out all at once. "Thank you," she kept saying. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." When she finally pulled away, her eyes were red but shining. She looked 10 years younger, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Can I see her?" "In a few hours when she's out of recovery. Get some rest. You look like you need it." Maya nodded, wiping her eyes. She looked at Richard. "I don't know how to thank you. You already did. You saved my son. We're even. We're not even close to even. You just gave my grandmother her life back." Tommy stirred then, waking up. "Is Maya's grandma okay?" he asked groggily. "She's perfect, sweetie," Maya said, kneeling down to hug him. "She's going to be just fine." "Good," Tommy said, hugging her back. "I prayed for her. Daddy taught me how." Maya looked up at Richard with surprise. He shrugged, a bit embarrassed. Seemed like the right thing to do. They stayed at the hospital until Maya was allowed to see her grandmother. Mrs. Rodriguez was weak but conscious. her eyes filling with tears when she saw her granddaughter. "Mija," she whispered. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, abuela. Someone helped us. Someone good." Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes found Richard, standing in the doorway with Tommy. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, like she understood something Maya didn't yet. "Bring them in," she said. "Let me thank them properly." Over the next few weeks, Richard became a regular visitor at the hospital. He'd bring Tommy after school and they'd sit with Maya and her grandmother. Sometimes they'd play cards. Sometimes they'd just talk. Tommy would draw pictures that Mrs. Rodriguez hung on the walls of her room, and slowly something shifted. The awkwardness faded. The gratitude and guilt transformed into something else. Friendship, maybe, or family. Richard wasn't sure what to call it, but he knew it mattered. One afternoon, about a month after the surgery, Richard showed up at the hospital with an envelope. Maya was sitting by her grandmother's bed reading aloud from a book. "Can we talk?" Richard asked. Privately, Maya looked concerned but nodded. They walked to the small garden area outside the ICU. "I have a proposition for you," Richard said, "and before you say no, I need you to hear me out completely. That's not a promising start. I want to offer you a job. As Tommy's companion and tutor, you'd spend afternoons with him after school, help with homework, take him to activities, just be there. It would be full-time, with a salary that would let you quit your other jobs." Maya started to shake her head, but Richard held up his hand. "I'm not done. Along with the job, I'd like to set up a college fund. You'd take classes part-time, working toward finishing your degree. My foundation would cover tuition and books, and there'd be a housing stipend so you and your grandmother could move somewhere nicer, closer to the hospital for her follow-up care." "Richard, that's too much. It's not enough. You gave my son something I couldn't give him. Hope, joy, the feeling of being seen and valued. He's different since he met you. Happier, more open. I want him to have that in his life permanently. And honestly, I need it too. I need someone around who isn't afraid to call me out when I'm being an absent father. Someone who understands what really matters." "You're asking me to be what exactly? A nanny?" "I'm asking you to be family. The kind that's chosen, not born. The kind that shows up and stays." Maya was crying again, but these were different tears. "Why? Why are you doing all of this?" "Because a month ago I had everything money could buy and nothing that mattered. I had a son who barely knew me, a life that was all work and no purpose. Then you showed up in a park with my lost kid, and you reminded me what it means to actually care about someone, to put someone else first, to be present. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Come work for me. Finish your degree. Let me help you the way you helped Tommy. Let me be the kind of person who sees someone struggling and actually does something about it." Maya looked back toward the hospital, then at Richard. "Can I think about it?" "Take all the time you need," but she didn't need much time. 3 days later, she called him. "I talked to my grandmother," Maya said. "She thinks I should do it. She says you're a good man who's trying to find his way and that Tommy needs me. So yes, I'll take the job." Richard felt relief flood through him. "Thank you. You won't regret this. I hope not. Because if you break that kid's heart, Richard Chen, I will make you regret it." Fair enough, the transition happened quickly. Richard's team helped Maya and her grandmother move into a comfortable apartment near his house in Manhattan. Maya started working with Tommy every afternoon, and the change was immediate. Tommy was laughing more, talking more, engaging with the world in a way he hadn't since his mother died. And Richard? He found himself coming home earlier from work, joining them for dinner, listening to Tommy's stories about his day, actually being present in his son's life. Maya started classes at Columbia in January, taking night courses toward her teaching degree. Richard would watch Tommy on those evenings, and it stopped feeling like a chore and started feeling like exactly what he should be doing. One evening, about 6 months after that day in the park, Richard found himself sitting in his living room with Tommy and Maya, playing a board game. His phone rang. A business call. Another crisis that needed his immediate attention. He looked at the phone, then at his son who was laughing at something Maya said, then back at the phone. He declined the call and put the phone face down on the table. "Your turn, Daddy," Tommy said, pushing the dice toward him. "Right," Richard said, rolling. "My turn." Later that night, after Tommy was in bed and Maya had gone home, Richard stood in his son's doorway watching him sleep. The walls were covered with drawings, some by Tommy, some by Maya, some they'd done together. There were pictures from their trips to the zoo, the museum, the park. A life being lived, not just existing. His phone buzzed. A text from Maya. "Thank you for giving me a chance. You changed my life." Richard typed back. "You changed ours first." He thought about that day in the park, about how close he'd come to losing everything, how a single moment of distraction had led to 3 hours of terror, but also how those 3 hours had led to this, a fuller life, a happier son, a sense of purpose he'd been missing. 2 years later, Maya graduated with her teaching degree. Richard, Tommy, and Mrs. Rodriguez sat in the front row, cheering louder than anyone when she crossed the